Hey guys, welcome back. Alright, we are going to look at our new stories that we're going to be looking at for the next couple of weeks. And the two stories that we're going to be reading this week are going to be one called Starry Night and one called Mr. Putter and Tabby See the Stars. Alright, so there are, remember, two different kinds of stories. There are fiction stories and non-fiction stories. Remember, fiction stories are made up, they are not true, but non-fiction stories are the ones that are true, that tell real facts and real things. Well, our stories this week are going to be fiction. They're all going to be made up, and they're actually realistic fiction. And if you remember, there are lots of different kinds of fiction, but realistic fiction means that it is a made-up story, but the things could be real. That's what realistic fiction. Some of the other stories we've read have been fantasy. And remember, fantasy stories are made up, but they could never be real. The things in them are so made up that it would be something that could never happen. But realistic fiction could have really happened. So both of our stories, Starry Night and Mr. Putter and Tabby, are stories that could have really happened in real life, but they are made up. Alright, if you remember, fiction stories all have characters, a setting, and a plot. And remember, the plot is where the problem and the solution will be. It's all the events that happen in the story, kind of from the beginning to the end, what's happening, and that's usually where the problem and solution are. We've talked about characters and setting and plot a lot this year, so you remember that stories have those things. And you'll notice that these stories will have character, setting, and a plot. Alright, something else that these stories are going to have. These stories are going to be talking about things that we could see in the night sky. Some of these characters in the story are going to be looking at the night sky. What are some things that you can see in the night sky? Yeah, so like if you go out at night and you look up, will you see, oh, I bet you could see the moon. What else could you see? Definitely stars, yes. So you'll notice that the characters in our story are going to be looking at the moon and the stars when they're talking about the night sky. And there's even something else that's really interesting about the stars and the night sky. And it's something called constellations. Constellations are kind of pictures that are in the stars. And there's a lady on YouTube that does a much better video than I do that kind of explains constellations. So I'm going to let her talk about constellations and kind of tell you about them, and then we'll come back. So here is the video.
Oh, hey guys! It's just gotten dark here, so we're spending a little time before bed looking at the night sky. And sometimes we like to look up at the stars and make up funny stories about the things that we see. Have you ever looked up at the clouds during the day and thought about what they looked like? A duck, an alligator, a shark, or even a bear? Well, people do the same thing with the stars, and they've done so for thousands of years. I'm sure you've noticed on a nice clear night how there are so many stars in the sky, more than you can probably count. Some stars look brighter to us than others, and the darker it is where you live, like if you're really far from the lights of a city, the more stars you can see. And for a long time, people have seen pictures among certain groups of stars, just like connect the dots. These groups of stars are sometimes called constellations, and scientists still use the names of these constellations to describe different parts of the night sky. Probably the most famous group of stars that's easiest to find is the Big Dipper. If you live in the northern hemisphere, you can spot it pretty easily in the northern part of the sky. It's made of 7 bright stars, and if you connect the dots of those stars, you'll see a big squarish bowl with a really long handle sticking out of it. In the United States, some people thought the stars looked like a big ladle or spoon, so they called it the Big Dipper. But just like the fluffy clouds we were talking about, groups of stars can look different to different people. In Great Britain, for example, the same 7 stars are called the plough because they were thought to look like a farmer's plow. And people in Germany thought it looked like a wagon. And those same stars also reminded lots of ancient people of a giant bear. Scientists today consider the Big Dipper to be part of a bigger constellation that they call Ursa Major, for Great Bear. The Big Dipper is easiest to find in the summer when it's higher in the sky. But in the winter, you should look for another famous constellation, Orion. The first part that you'll probably see are the 3 bright stars in a row. In ancient Greece, stargazers thought that they looked like the belt of a great hunter. They thought the 2 bright stars above it would be where his shoulders were, and the 2 stars below it, his legs. The more people looked, the more other things they saw. And if you use your imagination and follow the stars from one of his shoulders, you can see another group of stars, like he's holding on to something, like a shield. And what are those fuzzy lights hanging from his belt? Oh, kind of looks like a sword. There's a lot more to Orion than just a few stars. That's why when astronomers talk about constellations, they don't just mean the few stars that might look like something. They also mean all of the other stuff in that part of the night sky. So part of what gives Orion's sword its fuzzy brightness is a distant cloud of gas and dust called the Orion Nebula. That's part of the Orion constellation too. So what if you live in the southern hemisphere? Then keep your eyes open for the Crux, the smallest of the constellations. It's still pretty easy to find, especially in the winter, because of the 4 bright stars that make a cross, which is what its name means. The southern hemisphere is also a great place to find Sagittarius, a constellation that reminded ancient Greeks of a creature that was part man, part horse, shooting an arrow. For most people, the easiest way to find it is to look for the 8 stars that make this shape. To me, it looks more like a teapot, but that's why it's fun to make up stories. So the next time that you're outside and it's dark, look up and see if you can find any of these constellations or other groups of stars. Or you could just make up your own. Okay, Squeaks, let's find something that looks like a rat. See you next time on SciShow Kids!
All right, so we just learned about constellations. Have you guys ever seen the Big Dipper? Yeah, I have too. The Big Dipper is always really easy for me to find. But I have never noticed the Orion that she talked about. So I'm going to go out here in just a little while because it's night at my house now. And I'm going to look for Orion. And if you've never seen Orion, maybe you can go out this evening and look for Orion too. Remember she said you can find like the 3 stars that are supposed to be Orion's belt. And then maybe you can see the rest of them. And they're supposed to be really bright. And all in a row. So I'm going to go out later and see if I can see Orion. And we can talk about it the next time. Alright, so we are going to go ahead and read our first story. And your first story is in this Unit 3 Reader's Writer's Companion book. It's that little bitty thin one. And it's called Starry Night. And it starts on page 38. So 38. And this time, I'm going to let you guys read it on your own, okay? It's not very many pages. It's about a couple of girls named Josie and Ling and how they're going to sleep over and, well, you're going to have to read the story to find out what happens next. But read Starry Night and be ready because tomorrow we're going to be working with some other things with Starry Night, okay? So make sure that you've read it. You can read it with your mom or dad. You can read it to your dog. You know what you could do? You could even message one of your friends and see if you guys could video chat and read it together. Like maybe you can read a page and they can read a page. Would that be a good idea? Sure, maybe one of your friends in the class would want to read it with you. Okay? Alright, I'll see you guys later. Have fun reading Starry Night.